is the difference in that game, hey, Nick Foles didn't get it done, John. I don't think that was the case. I really thought their defense let him down.
Yeah, especially early. In the big plays, I think, was a problem. Jim Schwartz will certainly have an issue with that when he talks to us this week. The explosive plays, rare, I think, bad game from Malcolm Jenkins. You don't see that very often. A lot of people killing Jalen Mills. That was Malcolm's fault, which he admitted to the opening play to Deshaun Jackson. And then rarely do you see this, guys. If you look at the O.J. Howard touchdown, there's a lot of moving parts there. Obviously, Jordan Hicks gets beat in coverage. Ronald Darby misses the tackle. But then if you hold on and you see Chris Godwin sort of escorting him to the end zone, he's blocking Malcolm Jenkins. It's rare that you see somebody out physical Malcolm Jenkins. Chris Godwin did. And I think that was the theme for the game. I think the Buccaneers were more physical, and I think this is something I talked about on Countdown to Kickoff, a couple things. People are going to bring their A game for the Eagles all year. They're the Super Bowl champions. That's number one. Number two, I think a lot of people dismiss this was the home opener for the Buccaneers. Home openers are a big thing, and people are fired up. And I think that played into it as well.
John, let's look at some of the news that's happening. It seems like there's a lot of off-the-field stuff. We'll get back into this game in a minute, but obviously the big news today is Carson Wentz. He will be back. It's already been announced he'll start next week. You wrote a piece at 973ESPN.com explaining the timeline here, so kind of give us your perspective on the announcement today. Carson Wentz will start against the Colts this Sunday.
Yeah, it turns out, we talked about the timeline a lot, and I often talk about independent surgeons putting the time frame for rehab from a torn ACL and LCL at 9 months. That was always going to be a hurdle. The Eagles were not going to budge on that, turns out. So that 9 months had to be crossed, and that was September 13th. And then the second part, which Doug had intimated all along the way, is you would need a full week of practice before Carson Wentz was cleared. And remember, Thursday is not a full week of practice. You need to be on the field. Wednesday is the most important practice. So that kicked it back the extra week. And that's where you end up with week 3 in the Indianapolis Colts. The last part, and that turned out to be true, as Doug Peterson said a number of times along the way, when he's cleared, and he's going to play. And he's cleared, and he's going to play. And that part of it was always true, but now it's evident the Eagles were not going to budge from that 9-month timetable because Carson Wentz believed and wanted to be out there in week 1, and I think he could have played in week 1.
Yeah, there was the report yesterday when Adam Schefter brought it up on Sunday NFL Countdown that people in the organization felt that he was ready to play in week number 1. They just chose to wait until he was cleared for contact and ready to go, and that will be this week. Let me ask you, though, all right, Carson's back. Does that immediately jumpstart this team because they had some issues on offense yesterday? Do those issues go away simply because Carson Wentz returns?
No, they have some real issues at the receiver position. Those are obvious, and they're injury related. And right now, they're just kind of hanging on, waiting for Alshon Jeffrey to get back. By the way, that we've talked about Carson Wentz's rehabs so much. We haven't really gotten into Alshon Jeffrey's that much, and he's behind schedule because he had rotator cuff surgery in February after the Super Bowl. The typical time frame on that is 6 months, and that would have been late August. And here we are, rounding towards late September. He's probably not going to play this week. I think there's an opportunity he'll be on the field by week 4, but he's been behind, and that's one thing we haven't touched upon, and it's becoming bigger and bigger each week because this team's got some real issues at the receiver position.
With that, outside the organization. You know all the names that are being thrown. It looks like Josh Gordon's going to go to New England, so he potentially would be off the board. But is there a name out there on the street that can help this team?
I don't think so, for the mere fact of well, let me answer that in two ways. Certainly there are, because the situation here is so dire. But you have to realize Alshon is expected back. If it's not week 4, it'll be week 5. So you're talking about.
But even with Alshon back, my problem is with Wallace out. What does that do with Nelson? I mean, does he go back to the slot, or do they keep him on the outside? Do they like the guys they have in the other guys, the Carters and the Aikens? I mean, I think Aguilar excelled because he was in the slot. So I feel like you almost still need to get another guy, even if Alshon comes back.
Well, yeah, it's possible. You can always improve, and Doug talked about that. You're always looking to improve, but this is not the time of the year where there is a ton of people on the street. The one obvious one who has no one's going to doubt his talent is Josh Gordon, but, I mean, let's be honest. The guy's missed 56 games since 2014. So if you're playing by the best ability is availability rules, why does anybody want Josh Gordon? The reality is you can't count on him. So I don't know how viable that would have been in any circumstance. And then you start to talk about the other big name, Des Bryant. I've talked about a lot. He's not the same guy physically. I don't think he's going to be a huge help, and he's kind of redundant to what Alshon Jeffrey does here. Jordan Matthews, people will bring up because of his prior history here, but he's had a host of leg injuries since he left here, and he's still rehabilitating. And by the way, Josh Gordon's hurt as well, and the Eagles need help now, as in this week, so that enters into it. Not a lot of viable options, and that's because this is not the season where you add talent, and you know all the names. Aldrick Robinson just signed with Minnesota today. He's another guy who played in this league, but you're not going to find significant help in September unless you gamble on Josh Gordon and you hit. And I don't think that gamble is worth it.
Real quick, a name, Jordan Matthews. He was obviously here. I know he was injury settlement with the Patriots. Jeremy Maclin, I don't know if he's got anything left in the tank, but at least guys are familiar with your building.
Yeah, now, I don't think there's a fit. I think what you said about Nelson Aguilar is true. You want him in the slot. When Jeffrey is back, he's your wide receiver 1. So what you need is the second outside receiver. Now, the best case scenario is you want a deep threat. With Mike Wallace down, now he's got a fractured fibula. They're not going to put him on injured reserve yet. It is possible he could come back this season, and you could kind of sort of put things together if it's not going to be as long as people speculate. You can try to get through it with the Kamar Aikens of the world. If you have those two other guys and Zach Ertz out there, hey, you can get by with him as your fourth option in the receiving game. You would like a bigger home run threat. But if you bring in a guy like Jordan Matthews, well, he can't play outside, so you have to put him in the slot, and then you have to kick Nelson Aguilar outside where he's not as comfortable. So you have all these moving parts that are not necessarily what you want. In other words, I'd rather have Jeffrey, Aguilar, Aiken in the spots they're comfortable in than moving Nelson Aguilar to bring in Jordan Matthews, who, as I said, has had a string of leg injuries since he left here.
John, is this a little bit of an overreaction to yesterday? I mean, it always is every Monday, especially after a loss. Wasn't this a little bit expected with Jeffrey out, or is there legit concern with this wide receiver group moving forward, even when Jeffrey does come back?
Well, there's legit concern, but it's all injury related, and that's just part of this game and part of an NFL season and part of the war of attrition. Remember, we're not even talking about Mac Hollins anymore because he's on injured reserve. So, when this whole thing started, the top three outside receivers on this team were projected to be Alshon Jeffrey, Mike Wallace, and Mac Hollins. All of them are out, injured. I don't know how many teams in this league can go down to their fourth option at outside receiver and be really, really effective. So part of it is just bad luck, and you understand that, but you got to fight through it until you can get some of these guys back. In this case, Jeffrey will be the quickest, and he's also, luckily, by far the best of what they had in-house. And you kind of just got to hold your nose until you get to that position. And I think things start to improve. And Carson will also be a part of it because he's a better quarterback than Nick Foles. Even though he's not going to be 100% of his former pre-injury self right away, you do start to put that off-schedule offense back into the equation. You never had that with Nick Foles. Everything had to be structured. Everything had to run smoothly. Carson Wentz can make plays when things break down, and that will help as well. So all of this is coming, but, yeah, some of it is obviously an overreaction.
John, I understand Dallas Goedert needs time to be polished and worked into the NFL to be comfortable and really produce. But with the state of this offense, do you feel like he should be on the field a little bit more than he has been?
Not really. I mean, you talk about overreaction. That's more than anything else, and that's kind of a surprise. You think on a day where Carson Wentz is coming back, a day where people thought the Eagles might get into the Josh Gordon sweepstakes, everybody on Twitter's hit me up about Dallas Goedert. So I went back and I looked at Zach Ertz. Zach Ertz, in his first two games in his professional career, played 30% of the snaps and then 20% of the snaps. And I think Dallas is 24 and 22 through his first two games. I've been writing about this since the summer, and Mike will tell you, there's a redundancy to Dallas Goedert and Zach Ertz. Unless you can develop him into an inline tight end, which is what the Eagles are attempting to do, it's hard to get those two on the field at the same time. And that's going to continue until Dallas handles that inline tight end role a little bit more. Now, you'll see an uptick in 12 personnel with the receiver issues. Doug doesn't want to do that. He's forced into it. And you'll see some Josh Perkins as well. But what they're trying to do with Dallas Goedert is have the ability to put him on the field at the same time with Zach Ertz, but that's a work in progress. That's going to take some time.
John McMullen, at JF McMullen. Follow him on Twitter. A lot of Eagles stuff here. Mike Wallace looks like several weeks, if at all. Alshon Jeffrey, not sure what the latest is on him. Obviously, some issues there. But Jason Peters, I think another problem was him in and out yesterday. Now, he seemed to say, I'll be back next week, no problem. But he's a guy that it's getting tough to count on him a lot, right? And what do you think of Vaitai as the main backup? I know he was there. They won a Super Bowl with him. But, hey, things evolve, things change. Do they got to start thinking about maybe upgrading the backup left tackle spot?
No, I mean, it's kind of like backup quarterbacks. It's the same thing. Obviously, you're a backup for a reason. And if you can be effective like Nick Foles has been in the time he's in, winning 6 games, losing a couple, you tip your cap to that type of player and say, job well done. And you know it's going to be more of a grind, and it has been. Same with Vaitai. As a swing tackle in this league, all you have to do is look around this league. Tons of teams have offensive line problems. They can't get number one left tackles out there. So it's not, he's not the best left tackle in the world. I'm not trying to spin it. But as far as a backup and a swing guy, he's proven more capable than most. The concern becomes Jason Peters because, as you mentioned, it is at least you have to start thinking about the end. He's 36 years old. Father Time catches up with all of us eventually. I always say, if you're at Eagles practice And you watch Jason Peters get ready for practice. He's got this stretching regimen that takes, 15, 20 minutes just to get ready for practice, to get his body right. It's amazing he can continue to do it at this type of level. And I think you are going to see these times where he does leave games, and you hope you just have him healthy when things really count. But yeah, at 36 years old, you have to start worrying about that kind of stuff.
In the secondary yesterday, that was an area of concern as well. I mean, you mentioned that Jenkins didn't play. I don't say an area of concern. I guess more so, was it the secondary didn't play all that well, or were you more surprised that the pass rush didn't get there?
Well, a little bit of both. I mean, I'm always surprised when the pass rush doesn't get there for the Eagles, at least, a little bit here and there. And the Bucs did a good job. Again, sometimes the other team gets paid as well, and they're NFL players. But if you looked at the matchups, offensive line, you looked at that situation as a potential advantage for the Eagles. I think the Heat probably had something to do with it. That's going to affect defensive linemen more than offensive linemen, just because of the nature of the position and the fact that you're expending so much energy on the pass rush. I think that was an important part of the equation, and they just didn't perform up to the standards we're used to, and that's part of the reason you lose games in this league. I don't think anybody thought the Eagles were going to go 16-0. I think the positive you take out of yesterday is that somehow they got back into that game and made it a one-score game. So the positive to me is they never stopped fighting.
Yeah.
Because that was a blowout for a while, and you just move on to the next one. And now the next one becomes even of greater importance for a number of things. Obviously, it's a home game, but Carson's back, and you want to get things off on the right foot. And the third most positive part of all of this, the NFC East stinks, guys. It stinks.
Yeah, that game last night was atrocious.
Yeah, I mean, the Eagles are going to win this division going away. So, I mean, it is difficult to win the Super Bowl without having home field. Teams have done it in the past, but you saw what home field meant to the Eagles. So you would like 13 wins.
Yeah,
and home field throughout, but this team's going to make the playoffs.
Yeah.
They cannot not make the playoffs.
I agree with what you just said. I mean, look, being 10-6 and getting into playoffs is great. And in years past, John, sure, teams can do it, but I think this NFC is so much deeper than we've seen in the past, where it's going to be hard to win multiple games on the road if you're in the playoffs. That's why I think these games early in the season that have tie-breaking possibilities do matter. And let me tell you, this Tampa team might be one of the teams that you're looking at a tie-breaking scenario with the way they're playing right now.
Yeah, it's potential. You always have that one team that kind of jumps up, and who knows, maybe that's the Buccaneers this year. I think a lot of people were predicting that the past couple of years because of Jameis Winston and his ceiling. So, I mean, they've quietly added a lot of talent. If you look at, Mike Evans, former 7th overall pick, Hargraves wasn't there. He was 11. Howard was a top tier pick. Gerald McCoy was a top 5 pick. All of a sudden you get all these big time talents, and I talk about it with Jacksonville a lot. And you wake up one day and say, wow, they got some pretty good talent. And I think people don't understand that about Tampa Bay. They should today, especially at the skill positions. I mean, when you're rolling Mike Evans and O.J. Howard and Deshaun Jackson out there, that's pretty good.
Yeah, no doubt about it. Real quick, while we have you, John, the trade is now agreed upon. The Patriots are sending a 5th-round pick to Cleveland. If Gordon isn't active for 10 games, the Patriots get back a late-round pick from the Browns, which is interesting. You will get a pick from us if he doesn't play games. A 5th-round pick to Cleveland. Is that too much? A smart deal by the I'm one that says I would have kicked the tires on Gordon. You know, if he doesn't work out, he's a knucklehead. You know, he's not making a lot of money. You get rid of him.
Well, the Patriots are one of those teams. If you saw them yesterday against Jacksonville, they don't have anything outside the numbers. We talked about with Dallas. San Francisco, I thought, was the other obvious potential landing spot because those are teams that don't have anything at outside receiver. Here, I think people are desperate in the moment, but I think people forget Alshon Jeffrey's coming back. I mean, it's not going to be something that lingers late into the season. It's going to be the next week or two. And as I said, you kind of hold your nose. There's no need for this desperation. I can't say that's the same in New England because they've been rolling receivers in and out. Outside, they have slot guys, of course, but they have significant issues there. I don't think the Eagles do. The Eagles have a problem because their best receiver's injured, but he's coming back relatively soon.
All right, we'll see if that's going to be enough for Philly. My big thing is with that, what happens with Aguilar? Do they keep him outside? Do they move him back in? And if they move him to the outside, will that diminish the success that he had last year? I think that's the next domino to find out.
I think he goes back to the slot the majority of the time when Alshon is back. I think you probably have Kamar Aiken. Maybe get Shelton Gibson up to speed. They'll be the other outside receiver. And Nelson will go back to more working in the slot the majority of the time. I think that's the goal. I think that should be the goal. That's where he's most comfortable. That's where he's most effective. And I think that's what the Eagles want to get back to.
All right, we'll keep our eye on that. Josh Gordon traded to the Patriots today, and they get him for a fifth-round pick. Sports Bash Live, 97.3 ESPN. John McMullen, like all guests, appeared via the Boardwalk Honda hotline. A lot of NFL we'll get into tomorrow with John as Week 1 finishes tonight with Monday Night Football. John, thanks, man.
Hey, thank you, guys.